Hello, everybody, and welcome to the season finale of Filmsplaining. I'm your host, Martin Strange. This is a podcast where I teach you how to watch movies. On the show, I talk about movies that I love, why I love them, and why you should love them too. This is a very special episode. It's the season finale. This has been my year-long project, which is to watch all of the films directed by Martin Scorsese. And this will be a discussion on his life and work. Earlier this year in April, I started watching the short films of Martin Scorsese because I had never seen them before, and I ended up doing an episode of the podcast on those short films. And this inspired me to go back and rewatch some of his work. So I rewatched Mean Streets, I rewatched Shutter Island, Rolling Thunder Review, the Bob Dylan documentary he made for Netflix, and then I started watching some things that I had completely missed. I realized there were a lot of films in his catalog that I'd never seen before, and so I started finally seeking them out, starting with Casino and Last Temptation of Christ. And then I got the idea that I wanted to just watch everything he had ever made, including the things I had already seen. So it was rewatching half, if not more than half, of his filmography and catching up with the things that I had put off for years and years, finally finding them and just trying to get my head around who this guy is as a person and as a filmmaker. To me, Martin Scorsese is probably the greatest living director we have. He is, to me, probably the most important filmmaker still alive today. And I wanted to try and dig into what made his films so incredible, so impactful, so important for the culture of cinema. It's obviously well known that Martin Scorsese has been a champion of film for his entire 60-plus year career, and he has gone out of his way to help find and restore and distribute old movies, newer films from all around the globe. He is probably the greatest living champion of the art form of cinema that we have, and he has always been someone that I have greatly admired, and I wanted to try and figure out why. I got a little busy with the podcast, so this project was sort of put on the back burner until just recently when the new documentary Mr. Scorsese, directed by Rebecca Miller, was released on Apple TV. I signed up for Apple TV just to watch this because I knew it was going to be integral into understanding who Marty is, as well as the kind of very interesting rise and fall and middle ground of his career over the last 60 years has been. And so the interest in this project and finally getting through it and finishing up all of these films was renewed for me, seeing how I had lots of rescheduling issues and other things surrounding this season of the podcast. I decided to just sort of end it with this project and end the year on a high note. And so I have spent the last 2 months rewatching and watching all of the rest of his work that I hadn't yet caught up to. Martin Scorsese is known as a director who has lots of stylistic trademarks. He has a very particular film grammar that he created and also helped popularize over so many decades now. He has lots of really interesting stylistic tricks and techniques. He uses voiceover a lot. He uses the tracking shot. He uses jump cuts, over-the-shoulder camera conversations between characters. He loves freeze frames. He loves locking off a shot and then picking it up suddenly and following a character with Steadicam. He is brilliant at utilizing all of the possible techniques that a filmmaker has at their disposal. He took all of these things from watching both Hollywood movies, particularly the classic kind of noir comedies, musicals of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, along with all of the European cinema that he was taking in when he was very young, the Italian neo-realist films, the French New Wave, all of these things he was very influenced by, and you can see all of those stylistic trademarks come up in his work over and over again. The use of music in his films has become a trademark. The use of the Rolling Stones and other bands from the British Invasion, R&B music, doo-wop, the crooners like Frank Sinatra, these are things that come up again and again throughout his filmography. Actors, of course, are very important, and there are no two more important actors to his work than Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio. These two guys have been his leading men in virtually all of his projects dating back as far as 1973. So he finds people who he can express his ideas through and who he has a great working relationship with, who have lots of range as actors to portray many different kinds of people. He goes back to many of the same folks again and again, not including DiCaprio and De Niro. He's worked with Harvey Keitel many times. He's worked with Joe Pesci many times, Jodie Foster, Daniel Day-Lewis. He puts his mother in most of his movies, and he also has a penchant for using high-level character actors over and over again. You see this especially in the later work. In the last decade or two, he's had a few character actors who pop up again and again in his films, John C. Reilly among them, as well as Jesse Plemons, and all kinds of newer, really interesting actors who get bit parts in his movies because he likes what they bring to the screen. Probably the most notable and important thing about Scorsese as a filmmaker are his themes. He deals so often with the themes of masculinity and the male ego, the theme of suffering, one's relationship to God, class struggles, crime, and the American underworld is possibly the biggest theme that he's explored. Man's nature, battles of the soul, and very importantly, the struggle for artistic freedom. You see this come up over and over every time that he makes a big studio movie, and the subject matter of the film is often dealing with his own battles with the studio about how the film should go and how it should be presented on screen, dealing with big budgets and things like this. So he is a guy who is possessed by these ideas and has explored them over this 60-year career in so many different ways. Many people, I think, on the surface would just kind of attribute him to being a guy who makes gangster movies, but he is really so much more than that. He makes small, heartfelt films. He makes big, sweeping, operatic pieces that usually are confined to one or two people's kind of struggle against the world around them. He makes very sensitive films. He makes very dark, bleak movies that seem to go nowhere. And he makes movies that are also very hopeful and very optimistic about the soul and the human condition. Something I found so interesting that I learned when watching the Mr. Scorsese documentary by Rebecca Miller is how he has had commercial and critical successes as well as commercial and critical failures in virtually every single decade that he has been working. He has had to rebuild himself, his reputation, and his career over the span of that 60 years numerous times. There have been many times when he has fallen out of favor as a director. There have been many times when he has been championed as the greatest living filmmaker, and he just keeps going. Somehow he has picked himself up each and every time that he's fallen and returned with a masterpiece that is universally acclaimed. And I think that's more than you can say about any other filmmaker from both his generation or any other generation that came after him. And there's just no one else who you can even make a reasonable comparison to, because even his contemporaries like Brian De Palma or Francis Ford Coppola or George Lucas have either fallen far out of favor and not been able to get a movie made, or they lost the muse, or they decided that directing wasn't their thing. But Scorsese is a guy who just refuses to quit. Making films is in his blood. It is the reason that he exists. And he continues to this day to make interesting, provocative work that is both personal to him and very universal in its themes and how it relates to the rest of us, to the audience. So I'm going to go through everything that he has made here, and it's going to be a bit of a journey. Some things I will talk about more than others. The short films, which we start with, I did a whole episode on that, so you can refer to that for my full thoughts on them. But over the course of his career, Martin Scorsese has made 26 narrative feature films. He has directed 7 feature-length documentaries. He made 5 short films, 2 of those being documentaries. He created 1 documentary series for Netflix, and he directed a segment in 1 anthology film. That totals up to 40 complete works from one person over a course of 60 years. That's just an astonishing feat, a really unbelievable achievement that no one else, in my mind or estimation, has been able to even come close to. And so that is why it took me this entire year to finish this project, because finding some of these things was actually quite tough. In 1963, he directs his first short film called What's a Nice Girl Like You Doing in a Place Like This. This is done while he is a student at NYU. It's a very inventive short film, lots of visual flourishes. It's very reminiscent of the French New Wave stuff that he was really into at the time. In 1964, he makes another short film called It's Not Just You, Murray, which kind of puts him on the map in New York. And one of his teachers at NYU tells him that now he has a style and needs a philosophy. And this gets him thinking about serious themes and things that he wants to express on screen. In 1967, he makes his very first feature film called Who's That Knocking at My Door? It is a story about a Catholic New Yorker who falls in love with a girl and wants to marry her, but he struggles to accept her past and what it means for their future. This stars Harvey Keitel, who was instrumental in helping get the film made. This movie is not one of his better works. It is very much a first-time filmmaker's first feature, but you can see a lot of the things he's aiming for and what he is trying to achieve, the things that he is going to be searching for and investigating for the entirety of his career. Also in 1967, he makes another short film called The Big Shave. Once again, I did a whole episode on these short films with my buddy Alex Polishi back in season 3, so you can check that out if you want to hear my full thoughts on these films. But this is basically the film that puts Marty on the map, so to speak. It played at multiple festivals all over the world, and it gets him attention worldwide. And suddenly he has a philosophy to match his style. This is a very anti-Vietnam War short film. It is very blatant in the things that it's criticizing, and once again helps establish the visual style that he becomes to be known for. After this is a very interesting interim period, because he tries to get a lot of things off the ground and he works on multiple projects, but nothing really happens for the next several years. He is supposed to co-direct the Woodstock documentary with Michael Wadley, and he was in fact there filming many of those sequences that you see in the Woodstock documentary, but he was ultimately removed from credit of the film because the studio decided that Michael Wadley was to be the only director. And so this kind of gets him down a little bit, and he goes out to Hollywood for the first time. He works for 5 days on a sort of exploitation picture called The Honeymoon Killers, and then quits that job because he decides it is not right for him. And then he gets a job working on another music documentary, which at the time was billed to be the most important music documentary made yet, called The Medicine Ball Caravan. This is a bunch of blues and R&B and pop artists who are assembling for a massive festival. Ultimately, the film kind of bombs and is not very successful, and he is not credited as the director on it, but he works as an editor on it. And it is also at this time when he's in LA that he meets what will become many of the key figures in his life as well as his work. People like Paul Schrader, George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, and Steven Spielberg. He had already known De Palma for several years up at that point, and De Palma introduces him to some of these people. And this is what is commonly referred to as the movie brats. This is the generation who will define the new Hollywood. In 1972, he finally gets a job as a director with Roger Corman on a film called Boxcar Bertha. This is about a transient woman in Arkansas during the violence-filled Depression of the early 30s who meets up with a raucous Union man to fight the corrupt railroad. It stars Barbara Hershey and David Carradine, and it was done for Roger Corman's American International Pictures. It is basically a cheap exploitation picture, and it is, in my mind, just a classic example of a director not being perfectly lined up with the material that they're creating. As I said, it was a for-hire job for him, so his heart is not really in it. He himself considers it his biggest failure and his least personal film, so it is ultimately not super important in the lineage of his work, but I had never seen it before, and I found it on Tubi. In 1973, Marty really kind of finally arrives with the film Mean Streets. This is about a small-time hood who must choose among love, friendship, and the chance to rise within the mob. It stars a young Robert De Niro, who at that time had made a few films with Brian De Palma and came highly recommended to Scorsese, as well as Harvey Keitel in a kind of a larger and more fleshed out part than what he had in Who's That Knocking. This movie is considered an artistic triumph, and it puts him on the map. It puts Scorsese's name in everyone's minds, and really kind of announces him as one of the great new directors of this generation. Pauline Kael gave the film a glowing review. Scorsese's mentor, John Cassavetes, a very well-respected filmmaker in his own right, widely proclaimed that it was one of the best films he had seen. You know, this is the point where Martin Scorsese turns from being a kind of for-hire, very talented young filmmaker to being what will then be defined as an auteur. It's a great movie. It still holds up. It is based loosely on some of Scorsese's childhood friends and people that he knew in the neighborhood where he grew up. Obviously, it's a very important film. In 1974, he makes a short documentary about his mother and father called Italian American. I absolutely adore this movie. It's about an hour long. I believe you can watch it on HBO Max right now. It is also included in the short film collection put out by the Criterion Collection. It's my favorite of his documentaries. It's a movie that I can throw on anytime and feel good. If you've never seen it, it's just such a fun time getting to hang out with his family and getting to know him. Once again, I covered this last season on the pod. Also in 1974, he is handpicked by Ellen Burstyn to make a movie that she is trying to get off the ground called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. It's about a recently widowed woman and her son leaving their small New Mexico town for California, where she hopes to make it as a singer. However, they run out of money and have to make a pit stop in Arizona, where she takes a job waitressing, and the movie kind of proceeds from there. This is his first and pretty much only real film from a woman's point of view, and it contains a very strong lead performance from Ellen Burstyn as a fully realized, fully fleshed out character who is, you know, really having something to say about the modern American woman at this time. It is a very sweet, very honest, and realistic depiction of single motherhood, and it's also a film that I happened to watch with my mother the first time I saw it, and I think we both cried. It's a very important movie to me, and I wish more people would see it because I think it kind of gets lost within his filmography. But Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is not one of his most well-known works, but it is a very sweet and very interesting kind of offshoot of the things that he is interested in. 1976, he makes Taxi Driver. This is a film about a disturbed loner, Travis Bickle, who takes a job as a New York City cabbie, haunting the streets nightly, growing increasingly detached from reality as he dreams of cleaning up the filthy city. And it, of course, stars Robert De Niro. This is the first script and collaboration between Paul Schrader and Scorsese. It was a script that was actually originally given to Brian De Palma, who claimed that he couldn't make it because he needed something commercial at the time, so he handed it off to Marty. And Marty sort of changed some things about Schrader's original script, but ultimately the core idea was still there, that this was a new sort of imagining of the underground man and how masculinity was changing and evolving or devolving at this time in the 70s. It's an amazing snapshot of New York City in 1976 and the kind of like desolation and destitution of the city that was happening at that time. This is a commercial and critical success. This is another film that puts Scorsese on the map in terms of being heralded as the great talent that he is. It's also one of his most provocative movies, and you could say that it even gives birth to the incel and other characters like that, because many young men watched this movie and took away the complete wrong message from it. They idolized Travis Bickle and thought that he was some kind of folk hero instead of seeing him as the lonely, desperate, kind of pathetic psycho that he is. This movie actually inspires a man to commit real crimes in real life, attempting to assassinate Ronald Reagan because he is trying to protect Jodie Foster and is blaming Scorsese for making Jodie Foster do these god-awful things, what he considers to be heinous, sinful acts in the movie. And so this is Scorsese's first brush with some very bad press and some ideas that, you know, media now is influencing people in real life to commit crimes and inspires psychotic behavior. Of course, it's not the film's fault that that happened, but this is the first of many times that Scorsese's subject matter will impact his day-to-day reality. The same year he makes Taxi Driver, he is also making The Last Waltz. However, that film is not released ultimately until 1978. And at the same time, he is making his first big commercial studio picture with New York, New York in 1977. This is a musical about an egotistical saxophone player and a young singer who meet on VJ Day, which is the Victory over Japan Day, and embark on a strained and rocky romance, even as their careers begin a long uphill climb. As I said, this is Scorsese's first time working with a big budget from a major studio. He is living off the cachet of Taxi Driver being both a critical and commercial success. However, he really gets in the weeds trying to combine both the style of classic 30s and 40s Hollywood musicals with the subject matter that he is so interested in this particular case, a love story and a story about artistic obsession getting in the way of personal happiness. The film initially came in at 4.5 hours, his first cut of it, and everyone was kind of bemoaning this, even his contemporaries and friends who said that he had to cut it down. It is his first major critical and commercial failure. It bombed at the box office. Critics did not understand it. I watched the film for the first time just last month. I do think it doesn't really work totally. It is still incredibly long. Even the cut that we have now is over 3 hours. And Scorsese claims, as well as Liza Minnelli claims, that the original 4.5 hour cut made more sense and it was a better movie. But of course, that is just kind of untenable in terms of like selling a movie to an audience and having them show up. I don't think it's ultimately a very successful musical or film, but it is very interesting in how he is combining the artifice of classic Hollywood filmmaking with this new kind of new Hollywood style that he helped popularize and create. So in 1978, The Last Waltz comes out. And you're probably saying, well, you already did an episode dedicated wholly to The Last Waltz in this season alone. And the answer is yes, I did. That episode was great. I had my buddy Justin Horde on it, and he's a musician, and we both bonded over that movie. So if you want to hear my full thoughts on The Last Waltz, please check out that episode. But I will say that it's just one of the greatest rock documentaries ever made. Also in 1978 comes his last short film and last short documentary in the form of American Boy. This is a portrait of a guy named Stephen Prince. There is a very notable thing that happens in this movie that is then ripped whole cloth by Quentin Tarantino for a scene in Pulp Fiction. And if you watch it, you will find out what that is exactly. It's a really interesting movie about a very strange guy. And this is an important snapshot in Scorsese's life as well as his career, because he is fully in the throes of a cocaine addiction at this time, and it is starting to greatly affect his work. In fact, he almost dies at this point and is hospitalized, and soon thereafter, he gets a visit from Robert De Niro in the hospital, who wants him to make a new film with him and wants to kind of bring him out of this hell that Scorsese has dug himself into. So in 1980, that film is called Raging Bull, and it is the life of boxer Jake LaMotta, whose violence and temper that led him to the top of the ring ends up destroying his life outside of it. This is a hugely personal movie for Scorsese because, once again, he is dealing with the aftermath of this terrible, debilitating drug addiction and the failure of New York, New York. And he finds a lot of himself in this character that is ultimately a tragic male character, much in the vein of Taxi Driver. This was also written by Paul Schrader, but then later extensively rewritten by both Marty and Robert De Niro. This movie, when I first saw it, absolutely blew my mind. It's one of the early Scorsese movies I saw. I know I had seen Goodfellas and Taxi Driver before this, but this was one that really showed me how radically different cinema can be in terms of portraying a character within this framework. All of these characters, even though I did not grow up around these kinds of people or in this place and time, felt so very familiar to me. The violence in it, the heartbreak in it, the kind of loneliness and desperation of this guy who was on top, and then just his precipitous fall to the very bottom was just very impactful to me. There's an amazing tracking shot in this movie where Jake LaMotta goes from his dressing room to the ring. It is ultimately then perfected later in Goodfellas, but it kind of gets its start here. And this is a very important time in Scorsese's life as well. Shortly after this, he is trying to get both Gangs of New York and Last Temptation of Christ started. These are things that he was wanting to make, and we're on the precipice of a huge shift in Hollywood because the blockbuster has arrived. And now the kind of auteur vision, the artistic successes of things like Taxi Driver are starting to fall in favor in terms of what audiences want to see. Star Wars and Jaws basically confirmed that the arrival of the blockbuster and spectacle filmmaking is now taking precedence. So Marty is struggling quite a bit to find his place in that because that's not the kind of filmmaker that he is. Also at this time, he marries Isabella Rossellini, one of many notable wives that he had, and is entering a kind of period of wilderness. In 1982, he makes The King of Comedy, about an aspiring comic called Rupert Pupkin, who attempts to achieve success in show business by stalking and kidnapping his idol, a late-night talk show host. Stars Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis. This film happens because De Niro wants him to do it. Marty is just not really invested in the material. He doesn't have a very personal relationship to it. In that documentary, Mr. Scorsese, De Niro describes Scorsese doing like lots of wild things, lots of improvising, similar to the way they worked on New York, New York. And he says that he was really in the weeds and really out there on this one. And it is, unfortunately, another commercial failure. Some critics liked it, but some critics didn't understand it. It's one of the ones that has now been reclaimed as like a truly great movie. And I do believe it's one of his best films and one of his most undersung films. And in fact, it of course inspired the 2019 film Joker from Todd Phillips, who really just took this movie and Taxi Driver and threw Batman in the mix and made $1 billion with it. King of Comedy is definitely one to seek out if you have not seen it. In 1985, he makes After Hours, starring Griffin Dunne and Rosanna Arquette. It's about a man desperate to escape his mind-numbing routine. The uptown Manhattan office worker Paul Hackett ventures downtown for a hookup with a mystery woman. This is a very pivotal, important movie for Scorsese because it ultimately proves that he can go back to managing a smaller movie, a smaller budget, something more self-contained, and it ultimately restores his reputation as a filmmaker. It's a very personal film for Scorsese. If you watch it, you can see all the things that he's dealing with basically for the last 5 years, this wilderness period that he's entered both personally and creatively, going through multiple marriages and breakups, dealing with his drug addiction, dealing with the fallout of, the movies that he's tried to make really big events that just didn't really pan out. I love this movie, and it is very high on my ranking. I did an episode here on the channel, Physical Media Forever, about the Criterion edition of this movie. So if you want to listen to me get into more about After Hours, check that out right here on the channel. In 1986, The Color of Money. This is about a former pool hustler, Fast Eddie Felson, decides he wants to return to the game by taking a pupil in the form of talented but hot-headed Vincent Lauria. This is a sequel to Paul Newman's film The Hustler, and it was put together by Paul Newman and some studio heads who paired him with Scorsese. This also marks a new marriage for Scorsese in the form of a producing partner. It is a really fun movie. This was a first watch for me this time around. One of the ones that inspired this whole project was to catch up to The Color of Money, and it's a blast. Paul Newman has possibly never looked cooler on screen, and that's crazy to think about when you talk about one of the guys who is the coolest looking guys who ever graced the screen. This is a financial hit, and so once again, Scorsese is back on top, and it gives him the cachet to go to a new studio, and when they ask him what he wants to do next, he says The Last Temptation of Christ, which of course he's been trying to get off the ground for almost a decade. In 1988, he does make Last Temptation of Christ. This is, of course, based on the book and is about Jesus, a humble Judean carpenter, beginning to see that he is the Son of God and is drawn into revolutionary action against the Roman occupiers by Judas. This was a movie that I had tried to watch actually a couple years ago, and I didn't get all the way through it. I did not understand at all what it was going for at the time. My own personal relationship to Jesus is practically non-existent, and so I found it very hard to kind of dig into what it was trying to do. My research on this entire project included learning about, for the first time, the massive social stir that this movie caused. It was widely reviled by Christians everywhere. It was protested. It was banned in certain countries. It is, to date, his most provocative movie, and the movie that kind of puts his reputation on the line greater than any of his other films. It was labeled as a dangerous film by the Christian community. So suddenly Marty is once again thrust into the spotlight, but this time he's being forced to defend what is ultimately for him an incredibly important personal work. He's trying to reclaim his relationship to Jesus. Scorsese studied in the seminary. He was going to be a priest before he was a filmmaker. And so this is obviously a very personal thing for him to dive into this subject material. This movie, once again, is written by Paul Schrader and then later, of course, tweaked and changed a bit by Scorsese. He claims it's the most important film he's ever had to make. And just the reaction to it is stunning in hindsight to think about, because if this movie were released today, it wouldn't be, nearly as provocative as it was. But of course, we can say that because we have the benefit of knowing this about this film. But this time rewatching it, or actually watching it fully, I got a better understanding of what he was going for. And I do think it's a really interesting movie that I'm curious to see as I revisit it over the years, if it rises in my ultimate rankings. In 1989 is the segment that Scorsese directs for the anthology film New York Stories, which is a movie comprised of 3 short films, one from Scorsese, one from Francis Ford Coppola, and one from Woody Allen. I've been told by many friends and colleagues that the only one even worth watching is Scorsese's. It's called Life Lessons. It stars Rosanna Arquette, who he is reuniting with after Hours, and Nick Nolte, who he will work with again in a couple of years. It's a pretty fun little movie about an artist, an eccentric guy who is desperately and hopelessly in love with his assistant, and she is kind of trying to make her own way. She wants to be an artist as well. It's a very New York thing. It takes place almost entirely in this loft. A fun little kind of byproduct of his career, but not something that I will revisit anytime soon. However, in 1990, he makes possibly his most iconic movie of his entire career. It's called Goodfellas. This is based on the book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, who also writes the screenplay. Pileggi and Scorsese are old friends, and they worked together before, and they will work together again. This is the true story of Henry Hill, a half-Irish, half-Sicilian Brooklyn kid who is adopted by neighborhood gangsters at an early age and climbs the ranks of a mafia family. Like I said, this is Scorsese's most iconic film. It's my favorite film of his. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. There's not much to say about it because it's sort of unimpeachable, and no one I have ever met has ever had a bad word to say about Goodfellas. It features iconic performances from Robert De Niro, from Joe Pesci, and of course Ray Liotta, who is at the center of the film. Endlessly quotable lines. It is this really wild combination of montage and voiceover and quick jump cuts, and it's a movie that is crackling with energy and is never boring, is never slow, and is funny, incredibly hysterically funny, and also filled with incredible violence. So in my mind, it is the sum total of all of the parts that Scorsese is really interested in exploring, and displays his filmmaking at the peak of its powers, and his process as just this complete combination of all the things that he knows and is knowledgeable about. It's a movie that will never get old. It's timeless. After initially having some bad previews, becomes a hit. So once again, after the brutal kind of takedown of him by the detractors of Last Temptation of Christ, Scorsese is back in the mix. He is once again recognized as this great filmmaker who was able to put some past troubles behind him. Next, in 1991, he makes Cape Fear. This is about a small-town attorney who is haunted and stalked by a former client, a psychotic rapist whose trial he intentionally sabotaged years ago. This is a remake of the 1962 film with Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum, both of whom Scorsese casts in small cameo roles. It stars Nick Nolte and Robert De Niro. This is a really fun movie. It's a really kind of genre-y, like no frills whatsoever thriller, a little bit kind of drawing on the exploitation picture roots that he got sort of started in. It's not really a movie that has much to say or is like super interested in the themes that he is normally possessed by, but it does contain some amazing performances, especially in Robert De Niro. He got just so unbelievably ripped in this movie and is playing this insane, psychotic Southern maniac who is also very charming, very reminiscent of Robert Mitchum in The Night of the Hunter, if you've seen that film, which I also covered on this podcast. This is another hit, and suddenly, like, he's on a roll. He's got 2 back-to-back big movies, and now has the cachet to make a passion project, which comes in the form of The Age of Innocence in 1993. This is based on the Edith Wharton novel. In 19th century New York society, a young lawyer falls in love with a woman separated from her husband while he is engaged to the woman's cousin. This is, in my mind, the biggest departure, at least yet, in terms of Martin Scorsese's career, both aesthetically and in the things that he's exploring. Although if you really dig into this movie, it is still kind of ultimately about the savagery between people and especially the class struggles. This is a really fun, kind of saucy, steamy movie. It was probably the most surprising watch of the things that I had not yet seen, and it was the biggest kind of blind spot in my estimation in terms of the things that I had not seen. Very reminiscent of Barry Lyndon, just gorgeous, immaculate costume and production design. It's a huge production, and the attention to detail is exquisite. I think it's a film that I am really interested to rewatch and dig into the performances a little more. Daniel Day-Lewis is remarkable in it. Michelle Pfeiffer is incredible in it. And it has this just very interesting kind of outside of his normal milieu quality that would cause me to recommend it to anyone who is seeking to complete this filmography. In 1995 comes Casino. It's a story about 2 best friends in Las Vegas, a casino executive and a mafia enforcer who compete for a gambling empire and a fast-living, fast-loving socialite. This stars Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci reuniting again, as well as Sharon Stone in a very memorable role. This is another provocative one because the violence in this movie is taken from kind of, the violence in Goodfellas. It's transposed to a new extreme here. And also we're in a new place. We're in Las Vegas. This is not a place that Scorsese has explored before. He is exploring the criminal underworld in Las Vegas and the sort of brutality of that. Yeah, it's an incredibly violent, incredibly disturbing movie that to me is quite good. Obviously, it's a great movie. But even in the terms of Marty's career, I think it is sort of considered kind of a reheated leftovers situation of Goodfellas because, many of the same themes and ideas and even certain scenes and sequences are, in my opinion, better executed there. Notably, this is the last time that Scorsese works with both Joe Pesci or Robert De Niro for 24 years, which, marks a new kind of chapter in his life and who he works with and in the kinds of films that he starts making. After Casino in 1997, he makes Kundun, which is the story of the Dalai Lama's life as Tibet is invaded by China and the Dalai Lama is forced into exile. This is a movie that he made because he is trying to reach another level of deeper spirituality within himself and exploring a very important spiritual story. So it is in the vein of Last Temptation of Christ and Bringing Out the Dead. These films that are more interested in his relationship to God and to spirituality. This movie ultimately doesn't really work for me. I think it's extremely pretty. It's gorgeous to look at. There are majestic landscapes and the production design is immaculate once again, but it is very, very slow and kind of droning. And there are no movie stars in this movie to really anchor it and keep you invested. In fact, this movie is filled with mostly non-actors who he's working with for the very first time. And you can feel that in the film. It really takes its time. I do think it has some interesting things to say, but ultimately the audience and the rest of the world felt similarly because it got a very bad reception and starts another kind of downshift a little slow decline in Scorsese's career. After that, in 1999, he makes Bringing Out the Dead with Nicolas Cage and Patricia Arquette. This is about an ambulance driver who is slowly going mad. He is haunted by the ghosts of everyone he failed to save, hoping to be rescued by the love of a caring woman who he meets late night in the hospital. This is once again written by Schrader, and this is a movie that I had seen once, and I remember just feeling like completely decimated by the end of it. It's a very bleak, dark film and kind of hopeless. And it's not, one of the more fun, entertaining, exciting watches, of which he has many. It's clear that Scorsese is a little bit lost after the failure of Kundun. I think the filmmaking even itself is, it's still strong, but he's not really leaning on his trademark flourishes, and he's not really fully invested in these characters, I think, as opposed to other films. And so I ultimately think this film is successful in what it's aiming at doing, but what that is, I'm just not a huge fan of. So ultimately, it falls pretty low in my estimation. In 2002, he finally gets to make one of his biggest passion projects that he was trying to make as far back as the early 80s, which of course is Gangs of New York. This is set in 1860s New York, where Irish immigrant Amsterdam Vallon is released from prison and returns to the Five Points, seeking revenge against his father's killer, William Cutting, aka Bill the Butcher, a powerful anti-immigrant gang leader. This, of course, is notable for being the first time that Martin Scorsese works with Leonardo DiCaprio, who at that time is the global superstar that we all remember him as. And Leo has the cachet to make whatever movie he wants with whatever director he wants, and he wants that person to be Scorsese. He is also recommended to Scorsese by Robert De Niro, who had worked with him on This Boy's Life. This is the guy who becomes his leading man for the next 2 decades. So it's a very important collaboration. It also reunites him with Daniel Day-Lewis. This is really interesting because it's on kind of the opposite pole of The Age of Innocence, which they had made together just 10 years earlier. It's set at roughly the same time, but in completely different circumstances. One is high society and one is low society. Gangs literally warring in the streets for control of the land. This is his biggest, boldest in terms of scale and scope. He's notably working with Miramax and Harvey Weinstein, who he clashed with quite a bit on the set. They fought constantly about what the movie was supposed to be, and I think it suffers a little bit from the miscasting of Cameron Diaz, who I think is a good actor, but she's just completely wrong for this part, is trying this horrific accent that makes no sense. There are also long stretches of inaction in this movie. It's once again a very long movie, but the thing to come back to it over and over again for is, of course, Daniel Day-Lewis as Bill the Butcher, because it's an iconic character. It's an endlessly quotable performance. Whoopsie daisy. So it is fun in measures, but it is slow and kind of draining in others because you just really want to see more of the action. And when the action is going, it's great. In 2004, he makes The Aviator, which is the story of the life of aviation pioneer and eccentric filmmaker Howard Hughes, who became wildly rich and successful while simultaneously growing more unstable due to severe OCD. I had not seen this movie since I was a kid. This was one that I watched, probably very early on. I believe we saw it in class, probably history class or something. I think it's a remarkable feat of craft and technical filmmaking. Obviously, there's things that he's pulling off here that are incredible achievements, but I don't really emotionally connect to any of the story here, to Howard Hughes. I myself suffer from OCD, but I found it really hard to kind of empathize or sympathize with him due to his just grossly kind of miscalculated decisions around the money and the public funding he was using. Not public funding, government funding he was using. Look, there's some really stunning stuff in this movie. It certainly is an interesting performance from Leonardo DiCaprio, but I think Cate Blanchett really just walks away with the movie. It's totally her movie, playing Katharine Hepburn. But again, the emotional kind of payoff doesn't come until far too late into the movie, which is, of course, 3 hours long. In 2005, he makes No Direction Home, his first documentary about Bob Dylan. It is a 2-part documentary, specifically about the early career of Dylan up until the point that he goes electric with the band and starts making some of those electric records. In my mind, it's Martin Scorsese playing Ken Burns, because it is very kind of formulaic and very, deep, and dives into every single person and character who was part of Dylan's life and every single moment in time in his early life that is, considered important. I do think it's still a great achievement. And the first time I watched this movie, I was blown away by it. I was stunned. But, once you know all these things about Bob Dylan, it's kind of hard to revisit because, some of the mystery is gone a little bit. And I ultimately ended up preferring Rolling Thunder Review to this film. In 2006, he makes The Departed. This is a remake of the film Infernal Affairs, and it is a cat and mouse game between an undercover cop in the Irish Mafia and a criminal informant rising in the police force ranks. It stars, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Mark Wahlberg, and Alec Baldwin, and most notably, Jack Nicholson. We're seeing now for the first time Marty move over to Boston, and ironically, I think A New Yorker made the best Boston movie ever made. There have been lots of great Boston movies, Good Will Hunting, of course, The Town, another one, but this movie it's just crackling and firing on all cylinders. This is the movie in this decade that once again brings Marty all the way up to the top because he is finally recognized by the Academy. This movie wins 4 Oscars, one for editing, one for directing, for Scorsese, one for screenplay, and it ultimately wins Best Picture. This is kind of when the Academy finally starts recognizing Scorsese after he has been just snubbed numerous times over and over again. It is just an incredibly fun, entertaining thrill ride. Jack Nicholson is fantastic, and I can't believe that they had never worked together before, and I'm devastated that they never worked together again because it's such a fun performance. I think Matt Damon is really great in this movie. I think Leonardo is fantastic in this movie. Even Mark Wahlberg, who I'm usually kind of allergic to, is just great as the snide, quippy guy who everyone hates. The Departed is just straight up awesome. In 2008, he makes Shine a Light, a documentary about the Rolling Stones. It's really more of a concert film, but there is old archival footage sprinkled in there between. It's kind of a very bare bones, basic concert movie of the Stones at the Beacon Theater. They are introduced by Bill Clinton. Both Jack White and Christina Aguilera make appearances. And it's a movie that I really loved when it came out because I was really into the Rolling Stones. Still am, of course, but I was kind of really discovering them at this time. Yeah, it's fun, but it's ultimately kind of inconsequential in the grand scope of his career. 2010, he makes 2 films, the first being Shutter Island, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Ruffalo, Ben Kingsley. It's about U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, who investigates the disappearance of a patient from a hospital for the criminally insane, but his efforts are compromised by troubling visions and a mysterious doctor. Scorsese said this is heavily inspired by Samuel Fuller's Shock Corridor, and I sort of classify it as his take on the kind of trashy airport novel. It has very little to say or express. It's more of an exercise, visually and aesthetically, and once you see this movie the first time and once you figure out the twist, it kind of all sort of falls apart after that. This is a movie that does not really hold up on repeat viewings, but it is fun and entertaining in measures. This is notably a time when Scorsese is suffering from panic attacks. He says he's having them frequently on set, and so once again, he is feeling a bit like he's not really sure where his career is going. Things in his personal life, once again, are being shaken up. So it's a really interesting kind of inflection point in his career, yet again, but not a movie that I feel like is one of his most successful or interesting. Also in 2010, he makes Public Speaking, his first documentary collaboration with the writer and humorist Fran Lebowitz. I saw this movie for the first time, rented a DVD from the library. Otherwise, it is impossible to find streaming or otherwise. And it's exactly what you would expect. It's a portrait of Fran Lebowitz. And I think ultimately the next collaboration that they have later for Netflix, the series, Pretend It's a City is more successful and more entertaining. In 2011, he makes another 2 films. This is a very prolific time. The first is George Harrison, Living in the Material World. This is, of course, another 2-part documentary, very much in the vein of No Direction Home, but I think is actually his most fully realized and like deepest portrait of an artist. You can tell he really cares about George Harrison with the attention to detail and the kind of tenderness with which he portrays him in the film. This is another movie that just kind of blew my mind the first time I saw it. I was getting into the Beatles and George Harrison at the time. He is my favorite Beatle, and I love his solo records. I play them all the time, and so I am naturally drawn to this subject matter. But I do think it is kind of the strongest of his forms of combining old archival footage with new interviews with the people who surround the subject that he's investigating. Also in 2011, he makes Hugo. This is another movie I watched for the very first time this year. It is about orphaned and alone except for an uncle. Hugo Cabret lives in the walls of a train station in 1930s Paris, maintaining its clocks and adventuring with a new friend. This is interestingly his first and only attempt at a big family movie. Like, it's really kind of a kid's family movie inspired by the magic of the movies that he experienced as a youth. It's very inspired by Georges Méliès and early filmmakers who were also like magicians and photographers and had this very whimsical way of making films. And whimsy is basically the thing that populates this movie the most. It doesn't totally work for me. It comes off as kind of sappy, pretty weightless. There's not a lot of depth here. But he's trying some really interesting stuff, and I'm glad that he tried this. It's one of the few films of his that ultimately just doesn't really work for me, though. A film that does work for me completely comes in 2013. It's called The Wolf of Wall Street. This is about a New York stockbroker, Jordan Belfort, who refuses to cooperate in a large securities fraud case involving corruption on Wall Street, corporate banking, and mob infiltration, and he is retelling the story of his rise and fall. This, of course, stars Leonardo DiCaprio once again, as well as Jonah Hill and Margot Robbie and Matthew McConaughey. This is Scorsese's biggest hit, both at the time and to date. It confirms his celebrity. This is his first major hit in the internet age. So things like memes, the memification of this movie, the gifs that are born from moments in this movie did unbelievably well in Europe. In fact, it was even Leonardo's biggest opening in France, bigger than Titanic or Inception, which is just mind-blowing when you think about it. And it confirms Scorsese as a celebrity. His personal life is put under more scrutiny now. He's going on talk shows and stuff all the time again. It really is a reemergence of him as a public persona. The studio thinks it's far too graphic, and it was even like review bombed by people early on who didn't really understand what it was aiming for. They thought it was like glorifying excess, and in a way you can certainly read the film as glorifying excess, but if you watch it with a more critical and analytical eye, it's obvious that this guy was a terrible guy, and he is not someone who should be championed or glorified in any way, because he's plundering the American economy, and it's about these people who get away with everything, don't serve a proper punishment, at least in my mind. This movie rules. I watch it every few years. Very funny, just riotously entertaining. In 2016, he makes Silence, which is set in the 17th century, where 2 Portuguese Jesuit priests travel to Japan and attempt to locate their mentor, who is rumored to have committed apostasy, as well as to propagate Catholicism in the country. This is a book that Scorsese read in 1989, and he had been wanting to make for a while. He wanted to go deeper than he did on Last Temptation of Christ, and it's a movie that I watched when it came out, and I really, once again, I didn't understand it. I have trouble connecting with some of the more religious and spiritual works that Scorsese does because of my background and both because of my interests in his work and what he's aiming for. But rewatching this movie this time, it flat out destroyed me. And I think it did because the benefit of hindsight in watching the Mr. Scorsese documentary, where Ari Aster is talking very eloquent about this movie. And he says it is about what it truly means to be a Christian. And I started thinking about that a lot and was holding it in my mind the entire time I was watching this film. I think it's a remarkable achievement. It is another pretty long movie. It is pretty slow in parts. It is a very interior movie. It's about people struggling within themselves and how that manifests on the exterior. And it really got to me this time. I really sort of understood it on a deeper level than I did the first time. So it rose quite a few spots in my ranking. Really remarkable film. In 2019, it's another 2-movie year, the first of which is Rolling Thunder Review, a Bob Dylan story. This is the documentary that he makes on Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder period in the 70s. I want to say 74 to 76, I think is roughly that time. This is a really fun, like, playful documentary. It's got all of these elements that are contrived and created specifically for the movie. He is playing fast and loose with the actual facts and history of this tour and of this time in Dylan's career. You know, Dylan's persona at the time was a very mischievous, very playful, kind of raconteur, hobo sort of character who he's portraying on the tour. And I think it's a really fun movie. I really enjoyed the kind of fake Sharon Stone story. And of course, it reunites the two of them after Casino. Not a whole lot to say other than that if you are a fan of Dylan, especially a fan of the Rolling Thunder period like I am, I'm very fascinated by that period of his career. You should definitely watch this movie and have some fun with it. But also in 2019, he makes The Irishman. Once again, one of the more important kind of seismic movies in his career. This is about Frank Sheeran, played by Robert De Niro, a war veteran of Irish origin who works as a truck driver who accidentally meets mobster Russell Bufalino, that's Joe Pesci, who sends him to Chicago with the task of helping Jimmy Hoffa, played by Al Pacino, a powerful union leader related to organized crime. This, of course, is a reunion with De Niro and Pesci 24 years after Casino, and shockingly, it marks the first time in his career that Scorsese works with Al Pacino. And it's the first time that Pacino and De Niro have come back since Righteous Kill, which, of course, was a huge failure, both commercially and critically. But it is amazing to see them actually acting together again on screen. This film is all about getting older and trying to figure out what your place in the world is and trying to figure out the changing nature of the world. De Niro's character tells this entire life story within the confines of a kind of senior living facility. This, of course, is based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses, and this movie it knocks me out every time. I watched it when it came out. I think I watched it again during the pandemic at some point. And it's an epic, it's a crime epic. It's 3.5 hours long, I think. So it's not for everyone, but it's incredibly important. And I think, especially when you look at it within the context of his career and where he came from, it has some really interesting things to say about getting older in a society that seems to want nothing to do with you. In 2021, he's slowing down a little bit, only creating one thing. It's Pretend It's a City, the second Fran Lebowitz collaboration. This is a limited series. The only time he's done this in his career. It's created by Netflix and for Netflix. I mentioned on my Cabaret episode that I couldn't find this on Netflix and was bemoaning that idea, but it turns out I was looking for the wrong thing. I think I typed in the wrong title or something, because it is still on Netflix. It's available to watch. It's a really fun, just, hangout session between Scorsese and Fran Lebowitz, and really gets at their friendship, what they see in each other, her, refusal to change over so many years, especially even since they did Public Speaking. It's a fun series, and if you like her sense of humor, and if you like Marty's, the sound of him chuckling at her, you should definitely watch it. It's a lot of fun. 2022, another documentary, another concert documentary. He makes Personality Crisis, One Night Only, which he co-directs, notably for the first and only time, as far as I know, with David Tedeschi, who he's worked with over the years on many things. Tedeschi has been a producer and an editor on many projects. This is a portrait of musician David Johansen, famously of the New York Dolls. It's featuring a live performance at Cafe Carlyle in New York City, where he performs as the alter ego Buster Poindexter, singing his own songbook, along with new and archival interviews. This is another one that's very hard to find. It is only available to stream on Paramount Plus. I had to sign up for a free trial of Paramount Plus just to watch this movie. And if you're a fan of the New York Dolls, like I am, like massively, it's a must watch, because David Johansen is just such an interesting character, a real raconteur, a rock star in the mold that just aren't made anymore. He sadly passed away at the beginning of this year, and so I'm glad that we have this document now of his kind of later sort of lounge lizard act. Yeah, it's a really fun movie. It's not one of his best documentaries, but it's interesting that he chose this to do at this time. In 2023, his most recent film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which of course is based on the book. It is about when oil is discovered in 1920s Oklahoma under the Osage Nation land. The Osage people are murdered one by one until the FBI steps in to unravel the mystery. This movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone, as well as a huge host of amazing character actors. This is a movie that's stunningly crafted. He's working with Apple now after having been at Netflix with The Irishman and Pretend It's a City. It's incredibly vital and important material. It's kind of still a gangster movie. I mean, it still is ultimately about evil men coming in to like ruin a perfectly prosperous society and take what they want and give nothing back. You know, ironically, I was like living in Tulsa, Oklahoma a few years before this movie happens. My little cousin is actually an extra in this movie, so I have a kind of personal connection to it, knowing a bit about Oklahoma and the native land there. I was just gobsmacked by this film. Rewatching it, I still think it's like one of his crowning achievements, and certainly in the kind of very prolific like later period of his career, a huge standout. And wildly, I still know a lot of people personally in my life who still haven't seen it. So I'm recommending this to anyone who has still not seen Killers of the Flower Moon. Yes, it's long. It's another 3.5 hour epic, but it is really an artist at, towards the end of his life, towards the end of his career, searching for a story that he thinks is vital and important to tell. And he tells it with a lot of grace and also a lot of style. So it's hugely important in the entire context of his career. So that's it. That's all 40 of Martin Scorsese's works. If you watched this whole thing, if you are now a Scorsese acolyte, like I am, please seek out some of these additional resources that I found. One being a series produced by the British Film Institute and the BBC. It's called A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese Through American Movies, where he basically is taking you through some of his favorite films and explaining why he loves them and what he took from them for his own career. Also, as I mentioned at the top of this conversation, Mr. Scorsese, the documentary Portrait by Rebecca Miller, which is available right now on Apple TV. It's 5 episodes. It was hugely informative to me. It was very important in putting together all of this work and cataloging his career and also, once again, coming to understand who he is as a man and the things that he has taken from his life and put into his films. And there are several books, of course, many books, but ones that I would recommend are Peter Biskin's book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. This is a legendary book about the new Hollywood, and Scorsese, of course, is a key figure in it. Also, A Cinema of Loneliness, which is a collection of essays by Robert Kolker. There's a great essay about Scorsese in that, which I finished earlier this morning, as well as Conversations with Scorsese, which is a collection of interviews by the critic Richard Schickel. There are also other books, tons of them that mention him or have certain information you could find out. I really just had a blast doing this project. So many things that I rewatched that really kind of stunned me. I was shocked by how much I liked Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore still. I was shocked by how much more I liked movies like Silence and After Hours. The Age of Innocence was a huge discovery for me, as well as The Color of Money. That was just a really fun discovery. Again, this is why we have to kind of look at a filmmaker's entire filmography and career, because you find all of these little things that you don't really expect from them, even people who you feel like you know inside and out, which I feel now like I know Martin Scorsese much better. And if you have stuck with us this entire time, I thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video / this podcast. This has been a wrap on season 4 of Filmsplaining. And until next time, happy viewing.